Let's do one thing. I think we are live, so I'll make a start. I first thank everybody who is listening now or will listen soon enough. A warm welcome. To start with, I want to put the context into this discussion a bit. We were following quite a few recently published documents, right, which includes Creative Industries and the Climate Emergency Report, which highlights the context a bit. So creative industries as a sector represents 6% of the gross value added of the overall UK economy. And it actually employs near about 2 million people, right? That is the direct impact. Apart from that, we are part of so many different supply chains. So we have huge impact, and it is absolutely important that we meet our 2050 net zero targets. Now, to do that, we have to create ecosystems where green choices in production, in consumption, in investment are made. Along with our interactions with the circular design principles. Our understanding is to make that happen, we have to make the boundaries between subject areas porous, and we have to work together with all our supply chains to make that happen. Now, with that context, I want to start with Adam. And Adam, it will be great when you start, if you can give a bit of introduction about yourself.
Thank you very much, Parik. My name is Adam Mansell. I'm the Chief Executive of the UK Fashion and Textile Association. We're the largest network of fashion and textile businesses in the UK, representing everyone from UK manufacturing through to retail and catwalk and everything in between.
That is brilliant, Adam. So that means for fashion and textiles industries, you have a really good bird's eye view about commenting about the whole of the UK industry. Now, you know, Adam, achieving net zero is absolutely a priority now, right? It's kind of non-negotiable, and UKRI strategic theme, building a green future, kind of supports us in achieving that. It is also one of the very critical aspects of AHRC delivery plan, where we both are part of projects on that. So how you will define the current state of play? What are the industry's challenges? How prepared are we to meet it?
Well, I think there's a number of very significant challenges when it comes to sustainability or the journey to net zero. One of the key challenges is businesses knowing where to start on this journey. There's so many different jumping off points. There's so many different things you could measure. And in a recent survey that we did of our members, I mean, 55% of our members aren't even currently aware of national waste and emissions targets. And even more concerning, 88% of companies that we surveyed said they had absolutely no idea where to start, and all were desperate for help and support in understanding the opportunities and challenges that are there when it comes to the journey to net zero. And I'll come back to that point in a second. But I think perhaps the biggest challenge of all is dealing with end of life of both fashion and of textiles. So how do we deal with the 4 billion items a year that we buy just in the UK, of which 60-odd% end up in landfill? A huge resource there, potential resource. A huge challenge as to how we capture that material, how we convert that end-of-life material into new products. And there's a huge role for government and for its agencies such as UKRI and AHRC to help de-risk the investment that's needed in innovation. So going back to that biggest challenge of end-of-life, how do we set up a national infrastructure that can capture all of that material, that can then reprocess it? And then following on from that, how does AHRC, Innovate, all the others, NERC, help us de-risk the process of let's say, in 5 years, 10 years time, we've built these fantastic array of machines up and down the country where we've chucked in all of our used M&S shirts, and out has all this new virgin material. Well, we won't necessarily be able to turn that all into new M&S shirts. We'd like to be able to turn some of it. But can we take some of that material and turn it into brand new purposes? Can we work with Nick to see whether we can use some of that material in architecture and in building materials? Can we use it in aerospace, in defense, all those sorts of things? So there's a huge amount of challenges there. And one of the key stumbling blocks at the moment is the way that government support when it comes to innovation and R&D is positioned. So it goes to universities. My apologies, Parik, and other colleagues from universities on this discussion panel. Currently, most of the time, academia is in the driving seat as to what the research priorities are. My very strong view is that it should be industry that's in that driving seat, and we should have a partnership with academia, but it should be us coming to you saying, these are our challenges. These are the things that we're failing to grapple with when it comes to net zero. How can you help us achieve that? Now, one of the projects that Parik and I are very closely involved with is an AHRC-funded project called the Future Fashion Factory, and it's done exactly that. It's put industry in the driving seat. So whilst the money doesn't go directly to industry, it is industry who says, actually, I've got this problem. Please, can I have some of that money that I can go away and spend with partner universities like Huddersfield, like Leeds, to help me overcome some of those challenges? And it's come up with real solutions to some of the problems around net zero. So, for instance, it has funded some of the projects around how do we extract and reuse the dye stuff in end-of-life material. So it's not just about the wool and the cotton, it's about the dye stuffs, and can we reuse those? It's helped fund projects that have looked at alternative recyclable materials to replace traditional waterproof fabrics. So all of those different elements of that net zero journey, by flipping the way that the funding is allocated, has helped us on that journey. So there's a huge amount of things we can do there. And I think, going back to that, my very first point about lack of knowledge, lack of understanding about where to jump off on this journey. I think one of the very important things that's missing across the whole piece is a uniform way of measuring impacts, a uniform way of looking at life cycle analysis as an example. So are we looking at the input energy? Are we looking at the recovery of energy at the end? What are we measuring within the factory? Are we measuring the same things in a factory in the UK that we are in Portugal, that we might be in Bangladesh? So I think developing a toolkit for industry where the measurements, where an understanding of life cycle analysis, where the use of data and AI becomes much more important, all of those sorts of things will help us overcome some of the challenges and actually position UK to take advantage of the many opportunities that exist for moving the whole of our production and consumption basis towards a net zero target.
That is brilliant, Adam. That actually nicely leads me to my colleague Thanos. But before that, I want to ask you an absolutely straight question, right? Even a yes/no answer will be good. That is, you mentioned the Future Fashion Factory and in general, the Creative Industries Cluster Program. For me, what I saw from that program is, from an industry perspective, it is not only de-risking it, but it is actually making the boundary between academia and industry porous, so that change of ideas means we can only fund that many projects. But the discussions we were having as part of that platform is invaluable. Do you agree with me on that?
100%. I mean, I think both in terms of getting academia into industry, so that develops that partnership there, but also there was a very valuable discussion process about what the challenges the industry faced, around whether this project was appropriate, around whether something was happening at Leeds and therefore we shouldn't replicate it in Huddersfield, and all those sorts of things. So the clusters program has achieved a huge amount in terms of actual change within manufacturing businesses and in terms of fashion and textile businesses, but it's also brought industry and academia together in a way that I haven't seen before.
Could you see a direct economical impact of that from where you are sitting at a bird's eye?
100%. I've mentioned just a couple of the projects. Some of those projects are proof of concept, but others of them have been very close to market, and that de-risking element has seen a growth in output, a growth in sales, and a growth in profitability for those companies. So it has a direct positive impact on the UK economy.
Thank you so much, Adam, for that. I'll come back to you, but before that, I want to go to my colleague Thanos. Thanos, will you mind introducing yourself to start with?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mike. So my name is Thanos Angelis Dimakis. I am a reader in chemical engineering at the University of Huddersfield. And my research expertise would be around industrial symbiosis and waste exchange between different sectors, between industries, and also life cycle assessment, environmental impact assessment of novel processes and products.
That is great. So we are having a creative economic discussion in fashion and textiles, and you are from chemical engineering background. So the first relevant question is, have you ever worked with textile and fashion industries? And how is your way of approaching things can change how we approach things in our industry? In other words, how can you be a critical friend to us to change how we develop our product or that process?
Thanks, Mike. So yeah, in terms of my involvement in the textiles sector, I worked with textiles 10 years ago, just for 3 months for a quick project. But I mean, more recently, I think I've started becoming an expert on textile as much as I can, not in your level, but expert from a chemical engineering perspective. And that was mostly due to the Future Fashion Factories initiative and the whole creative cluster, because through that we had a lot of discussions, as Adam said, and some of them materialized in projects. And one of these projects was a project with the Technical Textile Research Centre and British Wool. It was funded, and then in that project we implemented the life cycle assessment, but we didn't use it as an end of pipe solution. So we have a ready product and we need to assess it, but it was a parallel approach. So there was a development of the prototype as from the textile expertise, but from a life cycle assessment perspective, we could also input at different stages of the development what are the critical factors that would have an environmental impact at the end. So you could optimize the development of the prototype with input from the LCA and the life cycle impact assessment and the life cycle costing. And after that initial project, there were different other small or bigger collaborations that we have developed in the textile sector. And again, some of them were using LCA as an end of pipe solutions. But the more I'm being involved, the more I see companies want to involve life cycle assessment hand in hand with the product development. So not only for finished products, but products that haven't been launched yet. So industry and academia, on that sense, they can work in parallel, hand in hand, in order to create that ecosystem that would lead to the greener economy, working in parallel, rather than we develop the product and now go and assess it. And if it's good, it's good. We have to restructure the collaboration between industry and academia, and that was the key output.
This is such a good point, Thanos, because obviously as a chair, I try not to put in many personal statements in panel discussions, but here I will make an exception, because when I'm working with Thanos, it actually changed the way I think. Because normally we have a way forward, step-by-step way forward of product development. Working with Thanos, if I'm saying I'm doing it next, but we can create a framework where he will put an input saying, no, don't do this, do this, because that will have a better ecological footprint or end of life solution. And that really changes, right? The way we think around innovation. And it really puts a new set of methodology into our research, which is really important. Now, thank you so much, Thanos, for that. Ultimately, the point of future fashion factory or future HRC projects where we will be working very closely with industry, our ultimate stakeholder is the industry, and the beneficiary should be everybody in the UK economy. So from that, I can nicely go to our most important stakeholder, which is the industry. And we are so lucky to have Amanda with us today. Amanda is the CEO of Hainsworth. And of course, I'll let Amanda introduce herself, but I want to say something about Hainsworth because I think living in Yorkshire, we are genuinely proud of this company. It started in 1783, that is probably before any of us are born. And then, kind of, yes, Adam, but you have the royal warrant that actually shows that you produce things at the highest possible standard, and you have kept that manufacturing heritage, and you have become cutting edge over the time. So a direct question to you, Amanda, do you see creating an innovative ecosystem that, say, between me, Adam, Thanos, Nick, James, we are trying to create between industry association and the university? Do you see that this kind of ecosystem with keeping net zero at the heart of it is something you really require? And I'll go from that and say, Thanos just explained how multidisciplinary element can play value to that. Do you see that from where you are sitting as a CEO of a company? Please don't worry. Take your time. I'll go to Nick and then I'll come back to you. Now, Nick, as I was saying before I start, that creative economy is much more porous than we think, and we are very complexly related, one area with the other. So my direct question to you is, HRC delivery plan talks about world-class people and careers, and kind of creating an atmosphere where career mobility can happen between researchers in design, fashion and textiles to architectural sector. Direct question, can you see that the input of textiles is changing the footprint of construction industry in the future and architectural industry?
Thanks, Parik. Just to introduce myself, I'm Professor Nick Clear. I'm the Dean of the School of Arts and Humanities at the University of Huddersfield. To answer your question in a single word is yes, but obviously there are certain issues that need to be addressed. I think Adam touched on a really, really strong point about the relationship between research in the academy and the needs of industry. And I think it's got to be a much more of a sort of a partnership. And I do think that it really helps a lot of our research if we are driven by the requirements of industry. I think there can be ways in which we can, develop sort of black sky thinking in terms of the way in which we think about certain kind of problems. But I think working with industry partners and finding out where their kind of issues sit and where the kind of possibilities of developing new approaches can be found is really important. And one of the big challenges in the construction industry is that it is an industry that seems to be kind of caught in a kind of circle, in a spiral, that there are ways in which certainly kind of funding and procurement and supply chains are there to sort of self-serve and to sort of perpetuate themselves. So how we break those supply chains, and there's no question that if we are going to achieve net zero, then we have to address those kinds of the levels of waste, the way in which so much of our kind of building output is of a very, very sort of speculative nature, to sort of make sure that we operate in much more kind of efficient ways. And that means questioning the kinds of materials, the kinds of processes, and the kind of thinking that we deploy when we're creating projects. And certainly looking at the way in which both the way in which kind of fashion can often operate. So, you know, the idea of we even use so many kind of fashion terms when we sort of talk about something either being bespoke or off the shelf. And these are kind of, you know, ideas of the way in which we've taken a language directly from fashion. But I think also the sort of the kind of experimentation and the sorts of innovations that we can kind of develop through working with textiles and fashion designers in different ways is really kind of opens up huge numbers of possibilities. Obviously, both industries have issues with waste, and both, you know, it's finding ways in which that we can kind of dovetail with one another, and the way in which we can kind of use sort of materials. And again, Adam talked about the kind of Marks and Spencer shirts and how we might reuse them. Well, the idea of just remaking more Marks and Spencer shirts is the kind of thinking that actually dominates within the construction industry. But the idea of maybe taking those old Marks and Spencer shirts and making a completely different kind of building material with it, a kind of lightweight roof structural fabric, or even using them. There's been a lot of work with using kind of fabrics in developing kind of formwork and things like that. So they could be used in very different ways. They could be used as kind of additives rather than as single materials in their own right. So I think the sort of the role of academia across all the sort of design areas is to work much more as R&D for industry. And I think that this gives our research a kind of focus and a direction. And given the sort of research environment that we're in, that we are expected to be able to kind of give a much more kind of measurable, quantitative approach to our sort of design research, that this gives it that kind of framework. But it also, you know, I'm a big fan of a lot of my work relates to the relationship between architecture and science fiction. And the reason why I like science fiction is because it forces you to ask what if questions. And it asks you to sort of think of often quite ordinary things in a very, very different way. So this sort of kind of potential of being able to sort of collaborate with other design practitioners and ask those kind of what if questions, if we are going to achieve the goals that we all know that we need to address, then I think that sort of collaboration is essential.
That is brilliant, Nick. I'll actually follow on with another question, right? One of the big part of that future fashion factory project was, and I think Adam will agree with this, because me and Adam were in the steering committee together, and it actually, yes, it definitely given some solutions to our problem, but it highlighted the problems to us as well that we never had a kind of bird's eye view on. One of the problem we realized that if we can offset the textile factory waste into, say, interior design or something, then obviously the carbon footprint is getting offsetting, and that is good for the environment. Relatively yes, no, maybe slightly brief answer. if we get £1 million between me, you, Adam, and others, can we solve that problem?
We'll certainly be able to solve a problem. But again, I think one of the things that this kind of conversation does sort of expose is that to create change, both in academia, in industry, but more importantly, at a kind of political level, you have to incentivize change.
Yeah.
And again, I think that sort of is and policy can't sit back and be kind of inert. We have to be kind of proactive in forcing these kinds of sort of situations.
I agree. So I'll summarize your answer, because we have some UKRI and HRC colleagues either listening now or will listen in future. So your answer is yes, £1 million will change it. So
£1 million would change a lot, Parik.
Thank you. That's brilliant. So I'll go to the policy point, because that is really important to James. But before that, Amanda, can you hear me?
You can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you now.
Good. Yeah, I'm sorry about the technical hitch there. These things set to try us.
Not a problem at all, Amanda. Should I repeat the question?
Yeah. No, I think actually it comes back to what you were saying about, you know, how to engage all this actually practically into industry. And I think, you know, probably like many business owners, you look at your budget for the year, you look at your available resources and your overheads, and you've got a level of capital investment and expense that you're trying to balance. And of course, with innovation comes cost, and you know, that is where the support's needed. And I was thinking about the MPD process, and I think that is the point where academia and industry should come together, which is when you're looking at those new product developments, and we're trying to evolve with industries that are passionate about sustainability and want different technical compositions of fabrics or different ways of manufacturing. You know, that's where the kind of, you've almost got that hypothesis stage of, you know, what are you trying to achieve and what will be the outcomes, and the outcomes should be part of that whole LCA solution. So I think, you know, there's an element there where we should be coming together, and I think that's what Future Factory Fashion has actually done to some degree. I think that hypothesis stage of product development, where you're thinking about that next generation or evolution of a product, that's really where we should be building in you know, that desire for life cycle analysis. And I think we can work together, and we should be working together on those things. So this kind of co-evolving of capabilities across sectors is really the key. And a bit like somebody said earlier, listening to Nick just a few weeks ago when we were talking on this subject, you know, going outside of your comfort zone, outside of your own industry, into different application solutions, especially for waste stream products, you know, that is crucial and something that I don't think is automatic.
Parik, can I just interrupt for a second? I've had a message to say that the audience can't hear Amanda.
I checked and they told me that they can hear it. I was sending.
Okay. Sorry, I'll go back to being quiet then. Sorry, I just had a message come through that said the audience.
Yeah, so I sent the message and I talked to people in the audience, and they said they can hear it. So
yeah, they can hear.
That's why I didn't interrupt earlier.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, yes,
I think we can carry on.
Yeah. So yeah, I can hear. You can hear. Okay. Yeah. So I think we're all on the same page really. I think collaborating with other disciplines, I think involving academia and industry together in terms of new product development and innovation projects. I think being pretty agile in thinking about waste management and how that can come across industry, not necessarily within the same. You know, I think these are the areas where we need to think differently as industry as well, to be a bit more exploratory and start to think outside, you know, what particularly maybe what peers within the industry are doing, but what about peers outside of your industry, and how can you connect with that and find solutions? Yeah,
but I can see a point where Nick and you and probably me should sit in a room and discuss that critically and do something. And I'm sure from UKRI that £1 million is coming. So Amanda, if we ask, and let's be critical here, right? Because we have to learn from our process. So obviously, me and you know each other for quite a long time now, but did Future Fashion Factory open doors for you with other academics that you never knew? Or in general, will you suggest to the government to continue with initiatives like this?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because, you know, just coming back to, you know, a lot of textile businesses are SMEs, right? And, you know, we have,
and micro companies.
Yeah, so we're SMEs. You know, we've got a number of challenges, especially given the external environment and all those things that are coming at us in terms of costs and additional responsibilities with meeting the demands of running a mill. You know, a mill is a very hungry environment when it comes to utilities. So, you know, cost of energy and all those things are at the top of the list. And I think, you know, when you look at actually the general principle of improving, just thinking about sustainability in general, improving your contribution, I think you have to come back to reduce. And when you come back to reduce, it's kind of like, okay, well, what can we do very differently, you know, to reduce that consumption level, or to think about a way of reducing it before you've even made that product. So I think that's where the theory and the practice of academia working with industry on projects like that is really valuable. You know, we have one at the moment where we look at the process of sampling, for instance, particularly in, say, the airline sector, where sometimes it's a design-led industry, it's a design-led project when you go into a new contract, and that whole activity at the front end is really hungry because there's iteration after iteration of samples. You know, and that's time and money. So when you actually think, okay, how can we do that differently? Of course, you can use digital photography to represent colour. But what about touch? What about feel? What about the more tactile element of understanding what that product's going to look like when it's actually in the hand of the consumer? And actually, you can't tell them that up front. You can only do that physically. So, you know, so how do you get away from that? You know, you get away from that by saying, okay, well, how do we get across that tactile feel? Not just the colour, but the tactile impression that your brain has of that product. How do we do that, you know, with software? And this is the kind of help we need as businesses. We're not software experts. You know, we're experts at manufacturing beautiful, premium brand fabric. You know, we're not software experts. So this is where we need Future Fashion Factory project. And we've got a project just on this very topic with Future Fashion Factory, which helps us just leapfrog that early stage of coming back to kind of hypothesis, because we don't understand it. So we have to explore, and that takes time. So, you know, by collaborating and coming together with experts more than what we have here within this business, that's how we achieve great things. That's how we move forward and change things. And that for me is what's really powerful about having the support financially to go and explore what we're capable of doing. And, you know, you don't always have that skill within a mill.
Just to put it into context, what you are saying it now in a layman term, that you might have a fabric in Yorkshire and somebody in India is actually filling that fabric, right?
Yes.
That is where we are going with our technology. Even before 10 years and being 10, 15 years, being an academic in this subject, I couldn't have imagined about it. So well done on being part of that brilliant project.
No, it's really exciting. And I think that there's other ways. I think, you know, we talked about the you know, the environment of a mill itself and thinking about the evolution of that even within your own business. I think there's different things we can do to contribute to this topic. If you think about the install of a mill with carding machines, with looms, you know, with milling equipment, these are heavy capital expenditure items that, you know, need support. And that means spare parts. It means, you know, waiting for components to be traveling by truck from Europe back to Leeds. You know, within our mill, we're building an engineering centre where we'll be doing that ourselves. So, you know, if we can shortcut that, if we can take out that cost, if we can take out that lead time, if we can reduce that impact on the environment by being more self-sufficient, being more agile, being more flexible, then I think there's a responsibility there too from an operational perspective. So, you know, it's not just in one-dimensional. I think that's the point.
Totally agree, and I'll touch on that in a bit again. But one thing is coming out of discussion very clearly, right? That the invisible force in creating anything meaningful is policy intervention, right? So we are lucky to have University of Huddersfield's head of corporate policy, James David. James, if you could please introduce yourself, then I have a few questions for you.
Okay, thanks very much. Yeah, I'm James Devitt. I work for the University of Huddersfield. I'm head of corporate policy and research and innovation. My job really is about understanding the landscape and the ecosystem and working out how we can respond to that and knowing our strengths, those sort of things.
So, James, do you see policy intervention will shape the net zero innovative ecosystem in the future even further? For example, we could see the importance of objectives like world-class ideas, world-class innovation, world-class impact in the strategic delivery plans of UKRI. Will it create more demand for impactful transdisciplinary research in future? Please give us a picture to how net zero will create more opportunities or indeed challenges for the creative economy.
I mean, that's an interesting question to ask right at this moment. I mean, understanding where policy direction is going is a very topical point. My answer to that, my short answer would be yes, it can be, but of course it has to be designed properly. I would go back to, I mean, thanks so much for having Adam and Amanda particularly here, because you know the key point I think I'm coming at the end, so it's really useful is to understand that, you know, Adam made the point about, you know, understanding the needs of industry and being industrially led. I think programs in the future, policies in the future, need to make sure that academia is listening to industry and working with industry. Amanda also said, you know, illustrated very, very powerfully that you know, manufacturers in textiles, for example, are good at what they're doing, but they don't have the time to understand all the innovations and the technologies that could benefit them. So that's a job, I think, for us, and I think that's really important. So what we do at the University of Huddersfield is learn what the ecosystem looks like, what the policies are coming in from outside, what the regulations are doing, and we look to try and match that against the skills and abilities that we have or our partners might have. And then we go back to industry and we talk to them about the challenges that they have. My knowledge of working with industry has led me to one thing, and that is that the solutions for the future, particularly for challenges like net zero, which are vast and complex, is that they cannot be done. They must be done by tackling it through a holistic, multidisciplinary approach. It's an idea of convergence, really, which is going on in industry, and it needs to be followed suit in academia and in the funding regimes as well that go with it. And I think that's my point, is that we at Huddersfield, we build multidisciplinary partnerships. So it's really good, from my point of view, to see academics from different disciplines coming together to providing those solutions, because that's really what industry needs, is the melding of design capabilities, which we have oodles of. We have scientific and technological capabilities. We also have that human-centered approach, you know, the psychology behind change. You know, we're talking about change often within businesses. Actually, the adoption of technologies is a psychological thing as much as a technological thing. So we're at Huddersfield, we're developing that kind of approach. And I also like to learn from good practice elsewhere and the good practice that we've been involved in. And Future Fashion Factory has been one shining example, I think, of a program, a partnership between the University of Huddersfield and Leeds and others, and a whole
Royal College of Art, yes.
Royal College of Art, but all the industries involved in that partnership. It's been a level partnership, which is as Adam was saying, it's not easily found, and so the results, in my view, have been much more impactful than they would have been if they were, as Adam was putting it, you know, the money directed at universities. They create a solution and then nobody actually wants the solution that they've provided. So my answer to your original question is yes, it's possible, but policy has to reflect the conversation that we've had here. It has to be industrially led, has to be holistic in its outlook, has to work across, I suppose, disciplines and possibly across research councils to make sure this happens, particularly with a topic like net zero, which is so complex in, you know, its solutions have to be broad.
That is actually brilliant, James, because that leads to my next question a lot. UKFT champions the interaction between the government and for this sector, right, around policy, lobby around policy. So, and Adam was the chairperson of the steering board for FFF. So, Adam, did the FFF initiative changed your approach a bit, or have it given you themes that you can take back to the government, which you might not have known without this framework?
Absolutely. I mean, I think more than anything, and sorry to be repeating myself, it's given me concrete examples of how putting industry at the forefront, but making sure that there's a partnership between industry and academia, can help solve problems. And, you know, to pick up points from all of the speakers, you know, that need for a partnership that is industry-led is something that I push at all levels of government on virtually any policy sector you could talk of. I mean, you know, we focus very much on product in this conversation, but we could have the same conversation about skills, you know, and in fact, we probably can't solve some of the product issues without changing some of the skills issues. So taking that learning about there needing to be a partnership between industry and academia, industry and schools, and taking that to government and saying, actually, this is how things need to progress policy-wise, to pick up James's point. It has to be done in partnership. It has to be done from the bottom up rather than the top down. And all of those learnings have come out of, you know, all of the, I've got loads of concrete examples of how that worked through the work of FFF.
Brilliant. Now, you know, I want to explore another angle a bit. Means James touched on that a bit, about how we can change behavior. Because ultimately we can invent the most innovative product with least amount of carbon footprint, but if we don't change the behavior, then we can't achieve net zero. In fact, it's very interesting because the UN Climate Change Summit probably acknowledged that the relation between culture and behavior, we need more data to establish that. Now, Professor Nick Clear don't know that this question is coming to him, but he led the way saying he do science fiction, and nothing probably changes culture more than science fiction. And we are here as part of a Arts and Humanity Research Council discussion. So Nick, do you see that art or this cultural element will play a huge role in changing people's behavior, hence to achieve net zero?
I think that there are a number of kind of issues wrapped up in that question, because it's still worrying in kind of some broader kind of political circles, where there is still a degree of climate skepticism. I mean, and I've started using the term that the philosopher Timothy Morton uses. I talk about climate catastrophe because that's what we're in at the moment. And the denial about not just what we do, how we do it, but also why we're doing it. And I think these are questions. These are exactly the kind of what if questions that I think these kinds of speculative futures kind of force us to look at. But actually, I think it's more important to sort of almost think about that with all the kind of descriptions of what the kind of economy of a future of a kind of post-neoliberal world might look like. Well, how does it translate itself into the kind of lives of ordinary people? And again, I think it's asking questions. So if we did in 2050, if we have achieved these objectives, what will people be wearing? What kind of streets will they be walking down? What kind of I mean, one of the things that we assume that full kind of employment is a good thing. But actually, maybe it'd be better if we had much less time to work, because so many of our processes are automated, so that we can contribute more to the broader kind of social objectives. So again, I think it's about challenging the assumptions of what the world will look like in 28, 30 years' time is going to be exactly the same. There'll be a lot of it. There'll be a lot of sort of similarities, but maybe it's it is the more sort of subtle aspects of art and design and culture that will be significant in the way in which they lead the way in terms of allowing us to achieve those objectives.
That actually begs to ask another question, because if I look at me and you do more public facing research than I do, right? So you are part of Kirklees Year of Music, you are part of Temporary Contemporary. It's actually good to give a bit of background to that. Nick does some initiative, right, where he actually takes the art from the university in a very simplistic language to places around Huddersfield, so that people, the taxpayer, have access to that art, to that culture, right? I found that fascinating, right? Do you see, Nick, that you are collaborating with, and I'll ask that question to Thanos as well, that you are collaborating with Thanos to get data and communicating through art and design and music, serious statements about what people need to do to save the planet?
Well, I think there's a sort of the role of kind of art and culture is to inform, but it's also to reflect, and it's also to kind of change. And depending on what you're trying to do with specific kind of pieces of work, then you need to be prepared to engage with the audience. You need to be, I think that in some ways the sort of, some aspects of culture almost just focus on their own sort of small elites that are kind of interested in that kind of outcomes. And I think one of the really successful things about Temporary Contemporary is that we have really engaged with people in Huddersfield. I mean, certainly we had a gallery in the Queensgate shopping market, and there was an initial point where people were almost afraid to cross the threshold. But, by welcoming people in and, being there to explain why we were doing some of the things, there was a kind of, over the period that the gallery was open, there was a really marked change in the way in which people engaged with us.
That is brilliant. I have a very interesting question in the Q&A side of it. Somebody asked, is there anybody the panel thinks is still missing from the conversations they're having across sector industries that they would like to engage? Sorry, I have to just go here with. Who wants to take that question? I think, Adam, do you want to take it?
Interestingly, I think the voice that is probably missing is the voice of the average person who's shopping on the high street. I think we can all get very wrapped up in the need to deal with all the waste in isn't fast fashion terrible and all that sort of stuff. I think that quite often misses the point that not everyone in the UK or across the world has a lot of disposable income to spend on clothing. So I think the voice that is particularly missing is, how do we, what do consumers want that allows them to make reasonable, informed choices and still buy product that looks good, that feels good, and that is accessible at a reasonable price point?
Do you think in this kind of discussion, it will be good. And we tried, Adam, in our recent conference to bring some part of policy making into the discussion. So do you see it will be better to have policy makers in this kind of discussion as well?
It's you know, without reflecting on my current political situation, it's quite often the way to talk to policymakers is actually behind closed doors. That's not to say it's a magical art. It's quite often easier to get messages across, and people listen better when it's behind closed doors, when it's necessarily in a public forum. There are things you can say privately that you might not be able to say publicly.
Yeah, I get that. I get that. Thank you, Adam. I think there is another question. I'm interested to see if James wants to take that. How does the panel feel we can effectively reframe the discussion around behavioral change to achieve the best outcomes? James, do you want to take that?
It's a combination of things, but I mean, one thing that occurs to me, and something that we do a lot of work on, and I suppose we all try to do day to day, is it's around language really and communication. I mean, there are three domains that we work in. One's around policy making and government, and they have a particular language or series of language. Then there's industry, and industry have many languages depending on the industry itself. And then you get to academia, and that multiplies by many folds depending on the academic and their discipline. So the key really is to try and find commonality, trying to find some way of having a dialogue that cuts across all of those, and obviously reaches out, as Adam was saying, to the general public because all of it is only relevant if it does make sense to you and I as the public. So my view about behavioral change is it's communication at the end of the day. It's about knowing the right messages to say at the right time to the right people, and being able to illustrate with examples. As Adam was saying, we know Future Fashion Factory is a good example of an example of projects that have worked. People visualize, don't they, in their own mind. They understand things through examples, through stories that are told to them. So I would say a lot more effort, I suppose, has got to be made by everyone to create stories that are not just good stories, but are told in the appropriate way for the right audience. So you know, the story has to be reflect the needs of business, which is about making money, and it's about, you know, it's those sort of things. Whereas for an academic audience, you know, we have a different set of objectives, but we have to frame it so that people understand what the benefit is, and that's generally how I hope people will change their modify their behavior generally, is when they understand what difference will it make to me. So it's a communication issue as far as I can see.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'll try to summarize the discussion now. Look, for me, right, and what this Creative Clusters program and FFF has shown us is, with a proper strategy, we can really make a lot of changes. Means when we started this program, right, it was, if I remember correctly, 5.4 million from AHRC. But industry, we have leveraged more than 10 million. I can't remember the figure now, 10 million from the industry. So we can't question that industry don't want to change. They have actually put finance into it. What this program also did, means all of us in this room was involved with the program in some way or the other. What this did is it bring the industry represented by Amanda. We have other 500 industries involved with this project. Bring the industry association, Adam, who have direct UKFT with direct connection with policymakers. The universities, 3 universities, absolutely trying to disappear the boundary and work towards the same cause, and people from other disciplines to one end Thanos, who is representing chemical engineering here, and in another end, Nick, who is an architect, artist, and science fiction academic. They bring together, and you know what? I genuinely believe that if we work together and if we create more programs like this, it is the best utilization of taxpayers' money, because we are actually changing the ecosystem in a way that industry wants, and we are ticking almost all of the AHRC's delivery plan, like world-class places, world-class organizations, world-class impact, world-class innovation, so on and so forth. So I hope my colleagues agree with that if you do like this. And on that note, we have to end today. I want to thank all my colleagues for attending this. I want to thank Beyond. I want to thank Creative Clusters Program, and last but not the least, Future Fashion Factory for giving us this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Bye.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Bye.
Bye.